Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to work on synchronization of our moderation item reviews and the submission votes, right? So at the moment, the user can probably do some kind of funky stuff. Never trust the user, never trust yourself, trust only the code, right? And the stuff might get a little bit out of synchronization. So what I want to do is I want to move the logic out of controllers into some services that will help us ensure that there are going to be no race conditions between those processes, right? So let's go ahead to our to-dos. We have a couple that we sprinkled around, so this has to do primarily with to-dos that are sprinkled around, right? So let's just remove this to-do here real quick from the video player, but again, go back to the menu, man. On the moderation item controller, so where I've put this comment to do make this async save. So let's say the review is in process and then the second review comes in, and basically you can end up with 4 reviews, or yeah, let's say 4 reviews, and the moderation item still not being complete. So let's go ahead, and in our API, what we're going to do is we're going to add a class, and we're going to add a moderation item review context, right? Mouthful. Anyway, we get an I service provider, provider, right? Service provider. And the reason for the service provider is so we can get our entities from the database and maybe invoke some other services that we need to, okay? So let's go ahead and create a public async task review in here, and some of the stuff that we'll need to pass in here, we will see it in a second, right? So coming back to the moderation item controller, let's go ahead and extract most of this stuff. So first of all, let's go ahead and get the query. We're going to cut it. We're going to put it at the top here. And the first thing you're going to see is we need the context, right? So let's go ahead and actually, before we start injecting any like services and stuff like that, let's figure out how exactly are we going to synchronize this. And primarily, I'm going to use the Semaphore Slim with a passage of 1, right? So there's the Semaphore, read only, and there it is, right? So what's going to happen is we're going to enter this method. We're going to go on the Semaphore. We're going to say wait async, and we're going to wait, right? So the first time that we enter here, and you can watch my video on the Semaphore if you're still going to be confused after this. I'm going to leave a link in the description. But we're going to enter the Semaphore. We're going to wait async, and once we pass the await async, the count here is going to decrement to 0, right? And once we release, we give it a 1, and it will not pass the await async unless if it's at 0, right? So if it's at 0, it is going to wait here until it's back at 1, right? So this ensures that only this ensures that this function executes only once, okay? So now that we know that, let's go ahead and start bringing out some of our services, right? So from the service provider, let's first put this in a scope. So the same way that we do it in our program CS when we seed the files, we create a scope, so it's only getting used here. And let's get a using statement at the front. In the scope, we can get required, or service provider, get required service, and app.db context, right? So this is where we're going to use the context to extract this stuff. Let's go ahead and import this, and another clause that we'll need here. So you'll see that we need the ID. So let's go ahead and supply that int moderation item ID. Let's go ahead, pop it here, and moderation item ID, right? There we go. Another thing that we don't want to do is we don't want it to be deleted, right? So if it is deleted, that means, you know, it's already passed. It's gone, man. So at this point, we should exit it. So before, what we did is we checked it here for these clauses, and now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to basically say, look, we're going to throw a custom exception, basically. Moderation item not found. This is going to be an exception. Done, right? And let's go ahead and throw new moderation not found exception. And there we go. So now what we can do is we can catch this exception and still return these results. Okay. So as for making this async safe, let's remove the comment. Let's cut this and let's put this logic after here. So again, context. I think this can get cleaned up more or less. We don't need to do a second query. If we're including the reviews here, this will already have the previous review. So what we can actually do is mod item, we can go into reviews, and in here the moderation item ID, we don't really need to grab that anymore. We just need to make sure that we grab it from the correct user, right? So the user ID is something that we'll need to provide. So let's go ahead and put the user ID here, and that should take care of that. So if the moderation item has a review for this user, we're going to extract that review. Otherwise, we don't really need to do this setting of the review. We can if we want to. I don't think it's used anywhere else here. So if it's null, really what we want to do is go ahead and add a new thing here. Okay. And new review, I think implement missing references. Yeah. And hold up. Missed a couple of things here. So the other things that we're missing is the review form and the user ID here. Again, user ID, we'll already have it. Moderation item ID, we can remove it because it's going to be decided by entity framework here. Review form, this is something that we can grab. So let's go ahead into the forms review form. Let's cut the class. We will remove it from here, and we will just put the class in here since this is the only place where it should really be used. Okay. And that's something that we're going to provide here. So review form, and there we go, right? So let's go ahead, put this here. And that's pretty much it for this part. Let's also go ahead and grab the rest of the stuff, right? Let's actually bring the to-do with us so we don't forget to do this part. And let's cut this much. This is where we're going to invoke our moderation item review context. But for this part, let's put it down here, okay? So migration context. This is something that we will need to invoke here. So let's go ahead, copy this line. In here, let's grab the type. We're going to pop it here. Again, come back here. Grab the rest of the name. Pop back here to the context. Rename it. And that should be used here now as well. Okay. So this looks okay to me. Yeah, just one thing. Await on the context save. And that's pretty much it. We're going to leave this to do in here. As for the configuration, let's go ahead and, make another type. So public class moderation settings prop. I think this will be an int and goal count. All right. So goal count, that's pretty much what we want to set. And let's go ahead and inject this through an iOptions monitor. So moderation settings, moderation options monitor. Let's go ahead, make this a field. And the thing that you don't want to do is you don't want to get the current value in the constructor, because this is going to be a singleton and the constructor is only going to run once. So the part where we actually want to get the settings is here. Okay, so settings, moderation and current value, and this is where we get the settings. And once we do have the settings, let's go ahead and put the goal count here. Okay, and this is how we get rid of the magic 3. Now we got this service. Let's go ahead and grab the moderation item review context. Let's inject it in here. Review context, moderation item review context. Yeah, that's fine. And then we can review. What do we review? Review the form. The form, we will need to change the import. Provide stuff like user ID and review form here. And then we also want to just await on this. Okay. This thing right here, let's go ahead and catch the exception that we were going to throw. So in here, let's pop down here where we had the moderation item not found. Exception, fix the import, and just return no content. Okay, and I think that will do. We can remove these if statements up top here. And I think this is a little bit better. Yeah, so we try to do the review. If not, we catch some exceptions, we return the appropriate response, and then if everything's fine, we return okay. As it goes for this service here, let's go ahead and make sure we registered in our startup. So coming to the startup, let's copy one of these lines. We're gonna add a singleton. Let's go ahead where I had the name person. Yeah, let's grab the name. We'll register it here. And another thing that we will need to do is we'll need to configure the options for the for the moderation settings. So the way to do that, we can go into services, we can say configure, and we say moderation settings, and then we need to grab it from our config, right? And name of, and again, we can do the same thing, moderation settings, right? And that is just going to get the name of the moderation settings here, extracted from the app settings, and it's going to put it here. So let's go ahead, get our app settings in here. Let's create this object here. Come back here, get the prop, make sure you copy so you don't do any misspells. Goal count, and I'm going to set it at 2. Maybe I'll pop it between 2 and 1. We will see how that works, right? So we register the service, we register the settings for the service, so that's going to get injected here. Service provider, that's the ASP.NET Core Framework gives us. And I mean, that's pretty much where we invoke it, right? So let's go ahead and see if this works. So let's give this a refresh. Let's go to mod, password, right, there we are, close moderation, and let's review, approve, maybe some kind of comment. And it looks like nothing has happened. Let's check the logs if something happened. Nothing did happen. All right, let's check the review and see if we've, messed anything up. So we've used the correct context throughout. We're waiting here and we've registered the things that we need. And just a slight mistake here. So if it's not deleted, did we get a not found then when we tried to vote, which we didn't handle? So let's try review again real quickly. I think it might succeed though. Yeah, it did. Okay, so we probably got the 404 here because I didn't put the Boolean logic correctly, but now it's fixed, right? So that works fine. Let's go ahead and see what happens if we, change the app settings. So let's go ahead, put a space here where we'll save it. So, the state on the backend refreshes. So, and once it refreshes, we'll change the settings and see what happens, right? So before we just got the review, and now what we want to do is we want to go into app settings. Let's just pop this to 1. Let's go ahead, give a review. And okay, so took a little bit of time to load, but I think that should have, let's try again. Okay, and if we go back to moderation, okay, and this item is no longer here. So I think it was still reloading. I'm not sure what exactly that was, but let's see if there were any exceptions back there. I can't see any, to be fair. Those are old. All right, so I mean, that's working. We can bump this number up or down or whatever, but that's pretty much it for the synchronization of the votes, right? So the next thing that I want to take a look at is the actual votes for the submissions themselves, right? So where we have the submission controller, this vote function here. So I mean, pretty much same situation. Imagine you vote once, the vote doesn't exist, you vote second time, and you end up with 2 votes, and then this is just gonna go crazy, right? So we don't want to kind of freeze here, because if 100 people trying to vote at the same time, I don't know how quickly this is gonna go, but this isn't like a super the user doesn't need to know. We have the logic on the UI anyway to kind of indicate have you voted or not, but what I want to do is I still want to have concurrency safety, right? So I don't want any race conditions happening here, and none of that. Okay, so let's go ahead and move this. We're going to move this into a background service, and we are going to say, first of all, let's get a directory in here. So submission voting. All right. So that's the directory. And in here, what we're going to do is we're going to create an interface of submission vote sync. So this is where we're going to put all of our submission votes, right? So let's get a task, submit, and we are going to have some kind of thing that we want to submit in here. And primarily, I think submission mutable. Let's rename that to submission vote. I remember when I was renaming vote or something to mutable, I've yeah, it just renamed this as well. So we'll just keep it at this, right? So we have the sync. Let's go ahead and also public and class submission voting service. Let's have a class. Okay. So the submission voting service is going to inherit from background service, and it's also going to inherit from iSubmission vote sync, right? So we want to implement both of these things, and this is basically going to process the vote requests in a loop. This is going to allow other services to basically submit it. So this service is going to act as a sync and as a processor at the same time. Okay, so background service and iSubmission vote sync, these are its two roles. When we need it to play the sync, I mean, it's going to play the sync, right? So what do we want? We want something super simple. We just want a channel, and we'll have a channel of create unbounded channel. So what do we actually want to submit? Right, so the things that we need to create is the submission ID, the value that we are posting, and the user ID, right? So let's go ahead on here, create a public class submission or vote form. I think that's fine. Int submission ID, int value, and string user ID, right? User ID, there we go. So vote form, I think that's something that should be here. So Control Shift F, and let's go ahead and get this in here. So that refactors this bit and this bit. The vote form, what we want to do is we want to put this in the channel here. Let's go ahead and get a field in here, read only, and we will just return channel writer and write a sync. We'll just write the vote form, and because one's a task value task, yeah. So let's just create a value task here, and we'll put this here as well, so we can just return this. If you want, you can do as task. It's not that important though. Right, so at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to put a thing into the channel here. And now what we want to do is from this channel, we want to extract it and process it here. So for this, we can steal some of the logic that we do here. So for example, like the beginning of this while loop, let's go ahead, put this here, right? Channel reader, no need to do that. Channel reader, wait to read async, right? Don't forget to make this awaitable. The other thing that we want is we actually want to grab the message. So let's just go ahead and make sure that we do that. And again, just make sure that you change the thing that you grab it from, right? One thing that we're gonna need is an service provider. So service provider, same as in the previous example, you know. Let's go ahead, catch this, and I think it wants an ignore here. Yeah, and that's it. So in here goes our magic main logic, and so all of this stuff basically, right? So take that, put it here, get the stuff that we need. So let's get the scope, service provider, create scope. Don't forget the using on the scope. Let's get the context, right? Scope, service provider, get required service, appdb context, and there we go, right? So we got the context first or default. Let's, I think it may be struggling with, I'm not sure what it's struggling with. Let's first, from our message, let's extract the submission ID and message. Let's get the user ID as well. Let's just pop this down here. Oh, press the wrong button. I'm pressing all the wrong buttons. Just give me a second. Use queryable. Yeah, so the queryable one. I'm not sure what it was contending with. Yeah, okay, just making sure it's not putting anything weird in my using statements. But yeah, that's the first or default. Let's just put it on one line here. I mean, it slides off a little bit. We can do that. Maybe, does that help? Not really. Okay, I've decided. So then we go ahead and get the submission vote. We add it to the context. And for the IDs, I mean, the same thing is going to happen. A submission ID, we get it there. User ID, and then the value. So there is potential for validation here. I'm just going to leave it for now. We are going to put it here as well. So we change the value and then we save async, right? The thing that it's asking here is to pass the cancellation token. So again, that's the cancellation token that's here. And that's pretty much it, right? So all the stuff that is happening here, it's here, right? And let's move this out into its own thing. So it's in its own folder. And because it has its own folder, I'll be inclined to say, let's put this vote form into its own folder as well. Okay. Let's just quickly, what is wrong? Submission value task vote form submit. I think no, I think that's fine. What's it crying about? Oh, okay. So vote form is from a different place now, so that's fine. Now we actually want to consume this service over here. Before we do that, let's go ahead and register it, because that's going to be a little bit like, because it's a hosted service at the same time, and we cannot grab the implementation behind the interface, so we kind of have to register the service twice, but you will see how this works. So in our startup here, let's go ahead and add a singleton, and we're gonna say I submission vote sync, and the implementation for that is submission voting service. Okay, and then we want to add a hosted service, and we want to extract our service from a provider. So provider get required service. We're gonna say I submission vote sync. So that's the service that we registered. It's still gonna error, but that's not a problem. We'll just say, listen, just convert it to this thing here. Okay. So because the submission vote sync is the background service, it's fine with that. And the only I submission vote sync we're gonna have is this background service, right? So that's how it's playing two roles. And when it's a hosted service, that's what it's going to extract behind the I hosted service interface. When it is a vote sync, that's what we're going to inject, okay? Behind the submission vote sync interface. So the background service stuff, we don't need to take care of that. What's it called, in the submission controller, where we are doing this thing here. Let's go ahead and from services, I submission vote sync, say vote sync, submit. We'll need to wait on this new form, right? Let's submission ID, user ID. Put a little bit here. Put the user ID. User ID here, and value will be the value. Okay. So, and again, now at this point, this is synchronized, and this is not basically making the request wait. So it will just go pop, 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 right? So as we submit it to the channel, we go off, and then when this service basically then reads the message, and then it does all the database stuff, and I mean, it does that perpetually, and I mean, that's pretty much it. We might potentially want to catch any errors here, so let's go ahead and iLogger. We'll get a submission voting service logger in here, and I think it will be good practice to, you know, log the error. Logger, log error. I think exception is the first one. Exception during voting or submission vote processing. Okay, and then that's going to be the exception that we print there. Okay, so I mean, let's go ahead and test it. Let's go back here, and if we go on one of these, let's go ahead and vote it up, right? So it's still pretty much instantaneous, but the thing that we really want, but because it's going to respond instantly anyway, the thing that happens in the background, that's the magic bit, that the synchronous thing, right? So, and because we refresh it, we get the data that's in the database. It's still that same thing, okay? And I mean, as it goes for the synchronization context, that's pretty much it, both for the moderation item review and for votes. So if you're ever faced with concurrency problems, I mean, basically, pick your weapon. Do you want to go the Semaphore? Do you need it as a background service where you, what's it called, when you need to just basically offload it as a response and you don't care about if it returns it or not? You need the Semaphore because you need to wait for it and you want to restrict how many things go through it. Use the Semaphore, right? Anyway, a link in the description for the Semaphore. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed it, as always, leave a like, subscribe. If you have any questions, leave a comment. Join my Discord server. You can ask questions there. I always say this. Listen, I stream on Wednesdays and Sundays. Why are you still not there? I know Libornija's there. You don't need to. I could still join, right? I'm expecting you, man. Hopefully, I'll see you there. I'll see you in the next episode.